to another live episode of Primetime Live with James here on Jess FM and Jess TV. Thank you for tuning in to this very special look back at my time 4 years ago in Ukraine. Tonight, the documentary, or the short documentary that we're going to be sharing with you, is fresh, it's new, and it's still encoding. So we're going to be playing it direct from our uh, Adobe Premiere dashboard. So bear with us. It may have a bit of delay, but we will play that for you. And then we'll have a 4K version available directly on the platform at a later time, so you can enjoy it in 4K as well. But because of streaming and such, we've reduced the resolution for tonight's program, but you still will be able to enjoy it in its entirety. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you're welcome to call in. We're doing things a little differently tonight in light of this documentary and the importance there of it. And that means that the phone lines will be open in the last the last 15 minutes of the program for you to call in if you wish to do so. Throughout the episode, you're more than welcome to also add comments to the chat section, regardless of what platform you're watching. We will get to those in the last 15 minutes of the program, but you can send in your comments via chat room throughout the episode. Again, the number for you to call in and talk to us at the studio is 604-385-5093. Jessie, thank you, in the control room in Lethbridge. I am currently working on various television shows in Vancouver, so I'm coming to you from the ProPix TV studios in Vancouver. And Jessie is controlling the feed and taking care of us with the technical side from Lethbridge at the Jess TV and Jess FM studios. So thank you, Jessie, for all of your hard work making this program happen. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to you live. So again, don't forget that you are welcome to join us via chat and via telephone throughout tonight's episode as well. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my apologies. We had some technical issues there. I'm hoping that you have audio now. Jesse, if you can confirm that we're back online here, it seemed to be an issue with our feeding software at Riverside. Seems to have had a bug this evening, so we'll try to restart here. And my apologies to everyone watching. My apologies to Jesse. I know you're working hard in the studio there in Lethbridge. So we're going to try to restart this feed, and hopefully we will do better and make it happen. So once again, my apologies. I understand you can hear me now, so that's excellent. I'm just going to reconnect everything here to get us restarted. So again, my apologies on that, folks. We had a technical issue. We are going to restart tonight's show, and we'll see if we have better luck. And again, we are coming to you. I'm feeding to Jesse in Lethbridge because I'm working on several TV shows and streaming series in Vancouver. So again, you can tell that I've wrapped on the one I've been working on since December because I was allowed to get my hair cut for continuity. So my hair is finally trimmed down and not looking like a forest. So that's good news. Let's restart here, ladies and gentlemen. And again, I do appreciate your patience as we had that technical issue, and we'll restart now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another very special episode of Primetime Live here on Jess FM and Jess TV. I am James Cousineau, and tonight we are taking a look at Kyiv, the Eternal City. The city has been bombarded by the Russian invasion and the war that continues after 4 years. Tonight we're taking a very special look because this marks the 4-year anniversary since my coverage on the front lines in Ukraine. Tonight we're going to take a look at the videos of various parts of the city of Kyiv, and we'll share information about the history, about the current situation, the culture, and what has made it so enduring after all of these times. Once again, as I was there witnessing the atrocities that were inflicted upon the Ukrainian people in 2022, I've brought this video footage and this collection together. It's not curated to run smoothly throughout the documentary. Instead, I wanted it to represent the chaos and the unpredictability that is the current situation throughout the amazing nation of Ukraine. With that said, we will take time to explore the history, the roots, and how it has progressed over the years, and why it is so important for the rest of the world to stand up and ensure that Ukraine remains a sovereign nation, one where the Ukrainians can dictate their own future. It's the oldest living capital city in Eastern Europe, ladies and gentlemen, a city of gold-domed churches, sweeping river valleys, a city that has been burned to the ground, occupied by foreign armies, starved into submission, bombed from the sky, and rebuilt more times than any city should ever have to endure. And yet, tonight, it still stands. This is Kyiv, and this is its story. A story that stretches back 15 centuries through empires and invasions, through genocide and revolution. A story that in the winter of 2022, the whole world held its breath to watch. A story that is not over yet. Before we begin tonight, I want to say something directly to you, as a journalist and as a human being who was there. In the early days of March and into April of 2022, I was in Kyiv. I was in Bucha. I was in Lviv. I was all throughout the nation. I was on the ground covering this war in its most terrifying and uncertain opening chapter. Tonight's footage, I am not sharing the graphic coverage of what I witnessed, instead showing you the history and the current situation of the architecture, of the city streets, of a city that was abandoned at that time. Much of the footage and many of the images that you will see throughout this broadcast tonight were gathered during my time in Ukraine. As I said, on its streets, in its shelters, and in places I will not soon forget. I made that deliberate decision in preparing tonight's program in the interest of keeping this broadcast open to all viewers, to families, to young people, to anyone who wants to understand what is happening and what has happened. I will not be showing the most graphic scenes from the front lines. I will not show the full scope of the war crimes I witnessed and documented in Bucha and other regions of Ukraine where I've reported. Those images exist. They are real. They are evidence. And they will be made available to those with the proper authority and purpose to use them. But they will not air tonight because they should be hidden. But because some things once seen cannot be unseen. And I would rather this broadcast open a door than close one. I want it to mark a history that all can watch. Those scenes, those faces, those streets and those moments will remain with me for the rest of my life, as they should. That is the burden and the responsibility of bearing witness, and I carry it willingly because someone must. I do hope, and I say this not as a political statement, but as a matter of basic human justice, that at some point in the future, Vladimir Putin and those who carried out this order will be held to account for the war crimes and the atrocities they have inflicted upon the people of Ukraine. The evidence is overwhelming. The record is clear. Justice may be slow, but it is not impossible. I will continue for as long as I am able to stand on the side of the innocent, to give a voice to those who have been silenced by fear, by force, by death. That is what this work is for. And I want to say one more thing before we begin, something I think is important for all of us watching from the safety and comfort of our homes tonight. The news cycle has moved on. Wars compete for headlines. Other crises, other stories, other urgencies have filled the space that Ukraine once occupied on the front pages and the top of the hour. I understand how the media works. I'm a part of it. But I need you to know this. The death and the destruction in Ukraine has not moved on. It continues today. It will likely continue tomorrow. Every day that this broadcast is not leading the news, somewhere in Ukraine, a family is being torn apart. A building is collapsing. A child is being pulled from the rubble. A soldier is dying in a trench for a patch of ground most of us could not find on a map. Tonight, for 1 hour, we are going to remember that. We are going to give Ukraine the attention it deserves, and we are going to bear witness together. This is for the people of Ukraine, and this is for the truth. Once again, you are watching Primetime Live here on Jess FM and Jess TV. Good evening, folks. I am James Cousineau, and welcome to Primetime Live. Tonight we take you on a journey through more than 15 centuries of one of the most remarkable cities on earth, a city called Kyiv. A city that, as you watch this broadcast, is enduring a reality that we in the comfortable West can barely imagine. The near daily threat of missiles, drones, and aerial bombardment from a neighboring nation that refuses to accept its right to exist. But to understand what is happening in Kyiv today, you must first understand what has always been. And that story begins a very long time ago. Archaeological evidence places human habitation in the hills above Dnipro River as far back as 15,000 years. But the city we know as Kyiv, from a name meaning simply the settlement belonging to the key, K-Y-I by definition. It emerges from the historical record in the 15th century AD when, according to legend, three brothers, Shek,
and Kyiv, and their sister, Libet, founded a settlement on the high western bank of the Great River. Whether, excuse me, folks. Now, whether that founding legend is fact or folklore, one thing is certain. By the 9th century, Kyiv was already one of the most important cities in the known world. Kyiv stood at the intersection of the great trade routes of the early medieval world. The famous route from the Varangians to the Greeks connected Scandinavia and Constantinople. It ran directly through this city. Viking traders, Byzantine merchants, Arab geographers all knew Kyiv and wrote about it with awe. In 882, the Varangian warlord Oleg of Novgorod captured the city and declared it the capital of the state historians would later call the Kievan Rus. He called Kyiv in the phrase that has been quoted for 11 centuries since, the mother of all Rus cities. That phrase and what it means for the identity of modern nations remains violently contested to this day. As we look at this history, we then turn to a point in 1240. It was nearly erased from the earth. But before that happened, we need to take a look at the control under Prince Vladimir the Great in 988. The Kievan Rus converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity in a mass baptism in the Dnipro River, an event that would shape the religious, cultural, and political identity of the entire region for 1,000 years. His son, Yaroslav the Wise, transformed Kyiv into a city that contemporaries compared to Constantinople. He commissioned the Cathedral of St. Sophia, which still stands today, its 11th century mosaics intact, and arranged the marriages of his children to the royal houses of France, Hungary, Norway, and Poland. Kyiv had a population estimated at 50,000 people at that time, when London had fewer than 20. It was not on the edge of the medieval world. Kyiv was its center. And then we move on to 1240. It was nearly erased from the earth, as I earlier stated. The Mongol army of Badu Khan descended on Kyiv with a force so overwhelming that the Venetian traveler Giovanni da Pian del Carpine passed through the city 6 years later, wrote that he found almost nothing remaining, only skulls and bones upon the fields. Thousands were slaughtered. The magnificent churches and palaces were reduced to rubble. A city that had shone for 3 centuries went dark. It would take Kyiv generations to begin to recover. As it rebuilt, it passed through the hands of one foreign power after another. Lithuania, Poland, the Russian Empire. The city changed names in the mouths of its rulers. Through every occupation, the people of Kyiv maintained something no conqueror could legislate or bomb out of existence: a distinct cultural identity, a language, a sense of themselves. When we come back, the city that became the crown jewel of the Russian Empire and the century of catastrophes that followed. Stay with us. We wanted to take a quick break here because Primetime Live is proud to be brought to you this week by Carey Movers Limited, the moving company Canadians trust when it's time to make their next big move. Whether you are relocating your home or your entire business, Carey Movers delivers white glove service with experienced crews, careful handling, and the professionalism you deserve. Because moving should feel like a new beginning, not a burden. Visit them online at www.careymovers.com. That is K-A-R-Y movers.com. Carey Movers, moving you forward. Now back to the program. By the late 19th century, Kyiv had become one of the most beautiful cities in the Russian Empire, a thriving industrial and cultural center, with grand opera houses, universities, and a Jewish community that made it one of the largest centers of Jewish life in all of Europe. But Russian imperial policy had a persistent and deliberate design to suppress the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian identity. A series of Tsaric decrees, most notably the Ems Decree of 1876, banned Ukrainian language publications, Ukrainian theater, and Ukrainian education. The message from St. Petersburg was explicit. There was no such thing as a Ukrainian people. They were merely Little Russians. The people of Kyiv disagreed. When the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, Ukrainians seized the moment. The Ukrainian People's Republic was declared, with Kyiv as its capital. For a brief and extraordinarily few years, Ukrainians governed themselves for the first time in centuries. But the Bolsheviks had other plans. After years of brutal civil war, Soviet forces took control of Kyiv in 1920, and Ukraine was absorbed into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the USSR. What followed was one of the darkest chapters in the history of any people anywhere on Earth. Between 1932 and 1933, the Soviet regime under Joseph Stalin engineered a famine of deliberate and catastrophic scale. Grain was confiscated from Ukrainian farms, sometimes seized literally from the mouths of starving families. Peasants were forbidden from leaving their villages to seek food. Internal travel documents were introduced specifically to trap Ukrainians in place as they died. The result was the Holodomor, from the Ukrainian word meaning to kill by starvation. Historians estimate that between 3.5 million and 7 million Ukrainians died in a single year. The streets of Kyiv filled with peasants who had walked for miles seeking food, only to collapse and die on the pavement. The Holodomor is today recognized as a genocide by Canada, the United States, the European Parliament, and dozens of other nations, although Russia, of course, continues to deny it. It's impossible to understand the depth of Ukrainian resistance to Russian domination today without understanding the Holodomor. And for Ukrainians, this is not distant history. Every family carries it. Every grandmother's silence holds it. And it is why, when Russian tanks crossed the border in February of 2022, Ukrainians did not simply surrender. They had seen what submission looked like. They had seen it in a million graves. Scarcely had the Soviet famine ended when a second catastrophe arrived. In September of 1941, Nazi Germany captured Kyiv after a siege that cost the Red Army over 600,000 men killed or captured, the largest military encirclement in the history of warfare. At Babi Yar, a ravine on the northwest outskirts of the city, Nazi forces and local collaborators murdered 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children in just 2 days. September the 29th and September the 30th, 1941. It remains one of the largest single massacres of the Holocaust. Over the entire occupation, more than 100,000 people perished at Babi Yar. The city was liberated in November of 1943, but nearly a third of its pre-war population was gone. They were killed, displaced, or deported. And then Kyiv was built once again, as it has always been. On August the 24th, 1991, Ukraine declared independence. More than 90% of Ukrainians voted in favor in a December referendum. Kyiv became the capital of a new sovereign nation. People danced in the Maiden. They wept, they sang. And in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin would later describe the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. That belief that restoring Russian dominance over Ukraine was not merely desirable, but historically necessary, is the thread that runs directly from 1991 to the morning of February 24th of 2022. That, we know, is going to be an important day in history, with the story still being written. The story of how we arrived at 2022 runs through the winter of 2013 and 2014, when the people of Kyiv staged one of the most extraordinary popular uprisings of the 21st century. It began improbably with a trade agreement when Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, a man with deep ties to the Kremlin, abruptly rejected a landmark association agreement with the European Union in November of 2013. Ukrainians took to the streets. What began as a few hundred students in the Maiden grew within weeks into a movement of hundreds of thousands. They called it the Euro Maiden. Then simply the Maiden. It was not only about the European Union, it was about corruption, about dignity, about the right of Ukrainians to determine their own future rather than have it decided for them by Moscow. The government's response was savage. Riot police beat protesters with batons in the middle of the night. Snipers, later determined to have been deployed by the government, fired into crowds from rooftops. More than 100 protesters, the Heavenly Hundred, were killed. Their faces are permanently displayed in a memorial on the Maiden today. In February of 2014, Yanukovych fled to Russia. A new government was formed, and Russia's response was immediate and violent. Within days, Russian forces, without insignia, the so-called Little Green Men, seized strategic positions across Crimea. A rushed and internationally unrecognized referendum followed. Russia annexed the peninsula. This was violating the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, and that was in which Russia had explicitly guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity in exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. Shortly after, Russian-backed separatists seized territory in the Donetsk and the Luhansk regions. A low-grade war began that would simmer for 8 years. In July 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people aboard. An international investigation determined it was struck by Russian-supplied Buk missile system fired from territory held by the Russian-backed forces. Through all of this, through the Maiden, through Crimea, through 8 years of grinding conflict in the east, Kyiv adapted. The city went on living, restaurants filled. A whole generation of young Ukrainians grew up knowing that war was happening somewhere in their country, but choosing to build something in spite of it. And then came the morning that changed everything. We're just going to take a quick break here to recognize our sponsor once again, ladies and gentlemen. Primetime Live is proud to be brought to you this week by Carry Movers Limited, the moving company Canadians trust when it is time to make their next big move. Whether you're relocating your home or your entire business, Carry Movers delivers white glove service with experienced crews, careful handling, and the professionalism you deserve. Because moving should feel like a new beginning, not a burden. Visit them online at www.carrymovers.com. That is www.carrymovers.com. Carry Movers, moving you forward. Now back to the program. At 5 o'clock, On the morning of February the 24th, 2022, the people of Kyiv woke to the sound of explosions. Russia had launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, simultaneously striking from the north, through Belarus, from the east, and from the south. The Russian military stated operational plan anticipated capturing Kyiv within 72 hours. They had prepared lists of Ukrainians to be arrested or killed. They had printed celebratory banners. Some units reportedly brought their dress uniforms for the victory parade. Within hours, the exodus began. With that exodus, millions of Ukrainians poured out of Ukraine and out of Kyiv. The United Nations would later estimate that over 3 million people fled the country entirely in the first month. This was the fastest displacement of people in Europe since World War II. The major highways leading west toward Lviv and the Polish border became rivers of vehicles. Families loaded what they could into cars, onto buses, onto train carriages, so overcrowded that people hung from the steps. Fathers, husbands, brothers. Under martial law, men became military members. Men between the ages of 18 and 60 were barred from leaving. They stood on the station platforms and watched their families go, not knowing when or whether they would ever see them again. What was left behind was one of the most surreal and heartbreaking sights of modern times. Kyiv, a city of 3.5 million people, one of the great capitals of Europe, nearly empty. And that is when I was there. Among other locations in Ukraine, I did spend time in Kyiv as well as a station or as my main point. Entire neighborhoods fell silent. Streets that should have carried tens of thousands of commuters carried almost none. The Kyiv Metro, one of the deepest subway systems in the world, its stations built during the Soviet era, deep enough to function as bomb shelters, was converted exactly to that purpose. Residents descended with mattresses, blankets, pets, and children. They slept on the platforms. They waited. Above ground, military checkpoints went up at every major intersection, sandbags, concrete barriers. Men with rifles who checked your documents and looked you in the eye to judge whether you might be a Russian saboteur. Curfews were imposed. After dark, the city was not merely quiet, it was officially forbidden. Even as I wandered the streets of Kyiv, I met up with checkpoints, with soldiers. I had guns pointed at my head. As they went through my phone, as they went through my cameras, looking for any sensitive information or any record of contact with Russians. They were taking security to the highest of points. I was not insulted. I was not angry. I was understanding of the situation in which they were in. I cooperated, and as a result, I was treated with that respect and allowed to continue my work as a journalist in the nation. I went to buy bread on the third day. I believe it was, maybe the fourth. Everything near me was closed. I walked for 40 minutes. Every shop closed. Finally, I found a small grocery I had never even noticed before. There was a line, maybe 60 people, and inside, half the shelves were already bare. There was no flour, no pasta, almost no bread. What bread was there, people were buying in stacks. You couldn't blame them. So was I. The food security collapsed with terrifying speed. Supply chains that had functioned smoothly for years disintegrated overnight. Drivers refused to make deliveries into a potential war zone. The major supermarket chains like Silpo, Novus, ATB, they operated on skeleton crews where they operated at all. Photographs taken inside Kyiv grocery stores in those first weeks show long, entirely bare shelves. Cooking oil, sugar, flour, and canned goods, the panic buying of staples, were the first to vanish. Often within hours of restocking, lines formed before dawn outside the shops that still had stock. Older residents who could not stand for an hour in February cold simply went without. The Ukrainian government moved to prevent full-scale price gouging, but the logic of scarcity was powerful. People who had the means hoarded. People who did not went without. And yet, in the midst of all of that, something else happened too. Something that surprised even the people living through it. Volunteers appeared, hundreds, then thousands. Citizens organized food distribution networks through telegram channels overnight. Local restaurants that had not yet closed began cooking for free. For the territorial defense fighters, for the elderly who could not begin cooking for themselves because they had nothing to cook. For the elderly that couldn't stand in queue. For the families who had nothing. Pharmacists stayed at their posts. Doctors stayed at the hospitals. Utility workers kept the water running, kept the power on, kept the heat flowing through bitterly cold February days. Through this, but for how long? Nobody could promise. The Russian assumption, the military assumption, the political assumption, Putin's personal assumption, according to intelligence analysis, declassified since, was that Kyiv would fold, that the government would flee, that the army would scatter, that the people, faced with the overwhelming force of Russian military, would simply capitulate. But they did not know Kyiv. On the night of February the 25th, as Russian armored columns drove towards the city and foreign governments offered to evacuate him to safety, President Vladimir Zelensky, a former comedian who had won the presidency in a landslide on anti-corruption platform, stepped outside the presidential compound with his senior staff and filmed a 41-second video on a mobile phone. He said, in Ukraine, the president is here. We are all here. Our soldiers are here. Citizens are here. We are all here defending our independence, our state, and it will remain so. It was seen by hundreds of millions of people around the globe. It may be the most consequential short video in the history of modern warfare. The Russian assault on Kyiv was blunted first by fierce Ukrainian military resistance, then by catastrophic Russian logistical failures. The famous 40-mile Russian convoy, visible on satellite images north of Kyiv, stalled in the middle of the mud of the Ukrainian spring thaw. Its fuel trucks empty. Its supply lines severed by Ukrainian strikes. By the end of March, Russia announced to withdraw from the Kyiv region, calling it a goodwill gesture. But it was a military defeat dressed in diplomatic language. But what retreating Russian forces left behind them erased any remaining ambiguity about their intentions. In the suburb of Bucha, 30 kilometers northwest of central Kyiv, investigators found evidence of mass atrocities. Civilians have been shot at close range. Some of their hands bound. Bodies have been left in the streets, in basements, in shallow graves. Women had been sexually assaulted. The International Criminal Court opened an investigation. Russia denied everything. I, for one, ladies and gentlemen, can assure you that this happened. I was there to document shortly after the Russians had pulled out. So I can guarantee you that this is a reality. Bucha became a name that joined a long and terrible list of places where the word atrocity is not rhetoric, but a recorded and documented fact. By April of 2022, Russian forces had withdrawn entirely from the Kyiv region. Slowly, tentatively, the city began to breathe again. Residents who had fled started to return. Shopkeepers rolled up their metal shutters. Restaurants turned their lights back on. Children reappeared on playgrounds. But Kyiv itself, it had looked into the face of what invasion actually means, and it would never look at the world quite the same way again. Now, for a final sponsor announcement, ladies and gentlemen, Primetime Live is proud to be brought to you this week by Carry Movers Limited, the moving company Canadians trust when it's time to make their next big move. Whether you're relocating your home or your entire business, Carry Movers delivers white glove service with experienced crews, careful handling, and of course, the professionalism that you deserve. Because moving should feel like a new beginning, not a burden. Visit them online at www.carrymovers.com. That is www.carrymovers.com. Carry Movers, moving you forward. To live in Kyiv today is to live in a city that has mastered the mechanics of survival while refusing stubbornly and defiantly to let survival be the only thing it does. Russia shifted its strategy after failing to take Kyiv. Unable to capture the city by force, it turned to destroying it from the air. A sustained campaign of missile and drone strikes targeted energy infrastructure, water treatment facilities, substations, and heating plants designed to make the city uninhabitable. To freeze the population into submission through a Ukrainian winter. Again, it failed, but at enormous cost. Through the winters of 2022 and 2023, Kyiv residents lived with rolling blackouts, sometimes lasting 18 hours a day. They charged their phones at community generator stations. They cooked on camping stoves. They slept in apartments where indoor temperatures dropped below 10 degrees Celsius. Hot water became a luxury. The rhythms of daily life were organized around the power schedule and the air raid app on every citizen's phones. The air raids would go off frequently, day and night. It got to a point where many, including myself, stopped going to the shelters, to the bomb shelters, to the air raid shelters, and instead allowed that space to go to those most in need. You adjust. That's the thing no one tells you about living through a war. You adjust to things that should be completely impossible to adjust to. After a while, when the sirens go off at 2 in the morning, you don't jump out of bed anymore. You lie there and you listen. You try to hear whether there are explosions, whether they are close. And then you either go to the shelter or you go back to sleep. And after the first day, I just went back to sleep or got up and looked out the window to see if they were heading in my direction, knowing that there was nothing I could do if it was to strike the hotel and apartment block that I was in. The next morning, you go back to work, capturing the images, talking to the locals that are still there. Few and far between, but some were still there. They were defending the city, a way of life, a culture, a history, and a future. Because what is the alternative? To stop living? That is exactly what Russia wanted. Kyiv was not about to give it to them. The cultural life of the city became improbably an act of resistance. The Kyiv Philharmonic continued to perform, concerts held sometimes by candlelight when the power was out. Artists kept painting. Writers kept writing. The Ukrainian language, deliberately suppressed for centuries, was experiencing a renaissance born of defiance. In the videos that you're watching throughout this episode, you will see members of the Kyiv Philharmonic and other musicians gathering in the main Kyiv train station celebrating. And at that point, they were celebrating the end of the Bucha attack and the Battle of Bucha. Entire city districts that had historically spoken Russian, though, switched and deliberately and publicly to Ukrainian. By 2023 and 2024, the delivery of Western air defense systems had significantly improved. Kyiv's ability to protect itself, the Ukrainian air defense network, became one of the most effective in the world. And that was out of sheer necessity. On some nights, interceptors destroyed more than 90% of incoming drones and missiles before they reached the city. But not always. Apartment buildings were struck. A children's hospital was hit in the summer of 2024, and every week brought new funerals. As of tonight, March 26, 2026, the war in Ukraine continues. The front lines have shifted through 3 years of grinding, attritional combat. Tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides have been killed. Millions of Ukrainians remain displaced. The economic cost has been staggering. Hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure and property destroyed. Not to mention the history, the culture, the important significant landmarks that celebrate the people of Ukraine and their rich history. And of course, Kyiv continues to be targeted. Just in recent weeks, waves of drones and ballistic missiles have struck Ukrainian cities, testing air defense systems to their limits. The government continues to function. The parliament continues to meet. Of course, the president continues to appeal to Western partners for the military support that Ukrainians say could shorten this war. The people of Kyiv continue to go to work, to bury their dead, to rebuild what is broken, to have children, to get married, to plant gardens in the spring. Because you plant gardens in the spring, because giving up would mean that the bombs had won. I'm coming back to something an historian in Kyiv said to me when I first began researching this program and my trip to Kyiv. She said Kyiv has outlived every single empire that ever tried to own it. The Mongols are gone. The Nazis are gone. The Soviet Union is gone. Kyiv is still here. If Putin has read any history at all, he should be very afraid. Between the Varangians and the Mongols, the Nazis to the Soviets, the Holodomor and the Babi Yar, the Maiden and the Ghost City of February 2022. 15 centuries. The empty grocery shelves, the men saying goodbye on the platforms, the selfie video in the dark, the bodies in Bucha, the wedding in the air raid sirens, the grandmother and her window boxes. Kyiv is a city with a longer memory than any of its enemies. It has carried its dead for 15 centuries, and it has kept walking. It is carrying the new dead now, and it is still walking. What happens next? Whether the weapons continue to flow, whether the political will in the West holds, whether a just and durable peace is ever negotiated. These are questions that will be answered not in Kyiv, but in Washington and Brussels and Ottawa and London and Berlin. They will be answered in the choices made by governments that are not being bombed. The people of Kyiv have already made their choice. They made it on the Maiden in 2014. They made it on the morning of February the 24th, 2022, when they could have run, and some of them chose to stay. They make it every morning. They get up and go to work in a city that might be struck from the sky before the day is out. The choice is this: to be free or to die trying. This is a choice that should humble every one of us who has never had to make it. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am James Cousineau here on Primetime Live on Jess FM, Jess TV. Thank you for spending this time with us tonight. Good night and stay safe. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and definitely share this with others. Let's spread a word of the rich history and culture of the Ukrainian people and celebrate why the world needs to come together at this time and bring an end to this illegal and atrocious war that has been inflicted on the people of Ukraine without choice. They have decided to stay and defend what is theirs, what is the future for their children and future generations. One that certain presidents have decided to abandon when they should be delivering the weapons and the defense systems to help the Ukrainian people to ensure their future destiny and to restore peace and sovereignty to a nation that has already been through most incredible challenges that no other nation could even imagine. And once again, thank you to Carry Movers bringing you this episode this week. Carry Movers is the company that Canadians trust when it's time to make their next big move. Whether you are relocating your home or your entire business, Carry Movers delivers white glove service with experienced crews, careful handling, and the professionalism you deserve. Because moving should feel like a new beginning, not a burden. Visit them online at www.carrymovers.com. That's K-A-R-Y movers.com. Carry Movers, moving you forward. Join us next week, 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on Jess FM and Jess TV. Once again, I'm James Cousineau. Thank you for joining us. Take care, stay safe, and Slava Ukraine. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is our documentary for this evening on the history and the current situation of a beautiful city of Kyiv. Along with the city, of course, the people are just as beautiful. There was one day I got up and I was heading out to do some reports, heading out of town to capture some of the front lines. And one of the wonderful ladies at the apartment block where I was renting the room, she had brought me in some homemade borscht, and it was wonderful because at the hotel or apartment, we didn't have a microwave available. We didn't have a stove. We had to make do with an open top kettle in which we cooked sausages, we cooked pierogies or boiled eggs. It was very limited, and it was even more limited by the lack of available food in the local retail locations. So for her to bring that to me when even the locals were suffering with the shortages of food was just amazing, thoughtful, and so greatly appreciated. I don't think that she understood how greatly it was appreciated at that point. But again, it just goes to show how amazing the people of Ukraine are, the people of Kyiv, and why we need to ensure that they have a long-lasting peace and that they have the ability to move forward as an independent sovereign nation that is recognized the world over. Now, when we look back at the Budapest Memorandum and the giving up of nuclear capabilities and nuclear weapons by Ukraine, a part of that was the guarantee that Russia would not ever invade, as well as the fact that the U.S. would protect them in the case that Russia changed their minds, as they have done. So that is something that a lot of people overlook when they say that they should not be supporting Ukraine. It's quite the contrary, that they have an obligation through that memorandum that was agreed to. And it is time for the U.S. president to restore the support to Ukraine that is not only owed to them, but that Biden and others have been supporting them with. and even Trump in his first administration had been doing. Kyiv is a beautiful city. Ukraine is a beautiful country. It is atrocious what has happened there, and the fact that it is going on still 4 years since my visit. I think of the people in Ukraine often. I think of the people that I visited throughout the different towns and communities. I think of the people in Lviv. I think of the thousands of people that I met along the border with Poland as they were fleeing the nation for the safety of the European Union and other locations and destinations around the world. Once again, my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. I stand with the people of Ukraine, and I hope that peace is restored sooner than later. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching Primetime Live here on Jess FM and Jess TV. We appreciate you taking the time to spend with us, and we hope that you will share this video with others so that the history of Kyiv can be learned, that it can be taught to different generations around the world, and most of all, that people can understand the urgency that is still required to end this war. Like, follow, and subscribe because it does help for us to reach a wider audience. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and thank you again for watching this episode of Primetime Live on Jess FM and Jess TV.